Hello and welcome to Healing Tips from the Heart, Intuition with Helpers, Healers, and Guides. I am your host, Dr. Lori Hops, licensed psychologist, writer, and artist. I've explored mind, body, and spirit related to intuition, or your personal guidance system, since early childhood. Meet my guests who have learned from their personal and professional lives to explore vast realms of knowing, synchronicities, and overcoming challenges. Their stories may inspire you with tools to enhance your daily living and relationships. Hello, everyone, and welcome my special guest for today, Dr. Robert Schwarz, or as I call him, Bob. Bob has been a licensed psychologist for over 38 years. He was executive director of the Association for Comprehensive Energy Psychology from 2008 to 2024. And he has organized over 30 conferences on various topics, including Ericksonian hypnosis, trauma treatment, and energy psychology. Bob has also organized ACEP's Science of Energy Healing online program and ACEP's EFT training program. He has authored 3 books, including Tools for Transforming Trauma, We're No Fun Anymore, Guiding Couples to a Joy-Filled Marriage, as well as numerous articles and papers. He has presented workshops and keynote addresses internationally on EFT and energy psychology and trauma treatment. And one of the nice things that I really enjoy about knowing Bob and working with him is his devotion to creativity, to spontaneity, and to joy. And he personally creates these modalities through music, songwriting, and improv, which hopefully we'll talk a little bit about today. Hi, Bob, and welcome.
Hi, Lori. Good to be here.
Thank you. I'd like everyone to know I've known you for many years now and have the deep pleasure and honor of working with you side by side through ACEP when I was on the board for many years, including president of ACEP. And just enjoy talking with you and spending time when we get that rare chance to meet in person. And it's a joy and a pleasure to have you here today.
Good to be here. Good.
Yeah.
But
So
we improvise it because we weren't clear about what we're going to see what happens. And
yeah.
I do think, for what it's worth, I just started retaking I've been doing it for years. I take improv classes, just for fun. And I highly recommend if anybody wants to up their creativity, go find an improv class in a town near you, and it'll change your life. At least
Yeah. And one of the nice things about improv that you taught me, and I've heard before, of course, is this notion of saying yes and,
yes.
which is a philosophy of life that can be quite interesting and challenging,
Yeah.
especially when everything inside of you is saying no, but.
Right. Well, it's interesting because I've looked at things, well, okay, you do trauma work, improv. How do those two things go together?
Yeah.
On one hand, they don't. On another hand, they do because, at least in my work, I see an either or thinking as trauma-based. Black and white thinking, either or thinking tends to have a kind of fear-based, trauma-based, and yes and is more creative and more open. And and life at its fullest is improvisational. You're not in the script, and it can be actually anxiety provoking, a bit. That's one of the challenges of improv. In fact, the first time I discovered improv was a friend of mine. Well, Yvonne Dolan, who was someone I really admire, does work in Ericksonian and solution-focused work for trauma. Well, her husband, Charlie, was all into improv. So they asked if he could do a thing at a conference I was organizing. I said, sure. So he comes and I take it was like an afternoon, break, and I go to this thing and it was like blew my mind. I'm like, oh my God, this is like a metaphor for life, and recovery from trauma, because anything that's traumatic that you repeat over and over and you're stuck in, well, that is not improv. So anyway, but it's a good thing. So
Yeah, it's fascinating. My mind immediately goes to the idea of frozen energy versus
yeah,
free-flowing energy.
yeah,
And so, although freezing is an aspect of life
and an aspect of trauma.
and an aspect of trauma,
Yeah,
even in life that is frozen, for example, a pond,
yeah,
doesn't remain frozen
right,
because life is movement.
right.
And so, even in the frozen state, like say a pond, there
Hmm.
is life underneath that frozen ice and inside of it.
Hmm.
And so, nothing really ever stays stuck.
So so there's a game in improv called freeze tag.
Okay.
And what happens is you have like two actors, usually it's two actors, could be more, and they're asked to do something, and they're doing whatever they're doing, and at some point someone says freeze, and they freeze in position,
Yeah.
and then you tap on one of the people, assume the position, and you have to start a whole new game.
Yeah.
Everything changes.
Yeah.
So the freeze in that case is a transition, right? It's like if from one thing to another. And in your metaphor of the pond or winter, that's the time to go into yourself. Things kind of slow down, and then when it unfreezes, usually something new shows up.
Very true.
So,
Um, and
yeah.
very apt for times of change. Yes.
Mhm.
So let's take another look at this. I like where this is going. So we know from intuition work that repetitive patterns that are non-responsive to the moment
Right.
don't really yield as much information, creativity, and usefulness as they could.
Mhm.
And so it's important to recognize patterns, but then to know how to adapt, adjust, interpret, use, ignore, whatever, work with them so that they aren't just a mindless repetition. Yeah. And so that creativity that you're talking about, the improv, the yes and is that right brain that sees possibility. And it can be anxiety provoking, as you mentioned. It can also be overwhelming and it can be depressing too,
Right.
because sometimes it means a loss of identity, because we often get a sense of comfort and safety from repetition or
Mhm.
from knowing what is going to happen next.
Right.
Yes. And so, do you see how that connects to
Of course.
trauma?
Of course.
Yeah.
Totally.
So, can
Um,
you explain that a little bit for our audience who might not be as familiar?
well, in terms of trauma, I mean, so the freeze thing is usually, in general, some sense of fear, some sense of danger. And we call things that we call trauma are usually danger, some experience of danger or overwhelm that a person can't handle. It's too much.
Mhm.
And so they may go into fight flight, or they may go into freeze, um, and they may develop patterns to, especially if they're overwhelmed, like even if it's childhood trauma, you learn patterns that sort of work. They work better than living in complete and total chaos. The problem, and so you the good news is you have that. And the bad news is, as you grow up later on, those patterns that used to be useful or relatively useful become less and less useful. Well, I talk a lot with people about our return on investment. The return on investment of that energy is becomes less and less. Um, Whereas when you were a child, it was reasonably good for what you could get compared to what you otherwise. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and so it helps you, let's say, alert to oncoming danger or to know to be able to predict people's responses or maybe safety, seeking safety.
Right.
So it's kind of like keys or codes to life.
Right.
But in the same way that we don't hold on to our keys from houses we know don't live in anymore or homes, you have these keys from childhood that were perfectly fine to open the door back then, but they don't any longer. They're archaic.
Right. Right. And the other thing is, depending on, I mean, there's different levels. I was, for instance, I was thinking this morning because we were going to do this, and I started thinking about when growing up, and, you'd say things like, is something wrong? And, the parents would say, well, no, nothing's wrong. Of course, something is wrong. And you learn to doubt this thing that's coming up that's telling you something's wrong.
Mhm.
You think, oh, I must be wrong. And so that's one source of people doubting themselves. And I'm sure you and many, many, many people, whether it's big trauma or even just the little traumas of life, parents not being there present in some way, or just saying, hey, what's up, mom and dad? And they go, nothing's up. But the person starts to doubt themselves. And so a lot of times people come to us and we have to help them go, no, what you're noticing is, there's something there, like you need to pay attention to that. Um, Improv's great for practicing that, because in those play situations, the trick is to allow stuff to come up. Um, so we're just going to go all over the place today. But one of my favorite games is, when I first heard it, is called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And I've done improv training for therapists, and
Oh, okay.
I love doing this game because it's a real challenge for therapists. So that in the game, somebody says, then the audience, so to speak, will say, I have a problem, and with, my kid smokes marijuana or something. And
Hmm.
the first person, good, is supposed to give good, logical, reasonable advice.
Hmm.
The second person gives, like, well, you should take him to a therapist or something, right? The second person gives bad advice, like, well, you should lock them in their room and, throw, and not let them out forever. But the third person gives crazy, ugly, Jack Nicholson, over the top advice.
Yeah.
Like, and most therapists like just sit there, they can't do it. They're so busy being good, and
Hmm.
it freaks them out. And so, but what's interesting is it means that you have to deny, or it's too scary to get into your id.
Yes.
And so it's hard to, sometimes relate to clients, but that happens with all, we get ideas, they come through and go, that's bad. I shouldn't have that idea.
Hmm.
And it's just an idea floated through, but we judge ourselves and get all, negative on ourselves for having this so-called non-PC idea, which is, in the PC environment, it can be pretty problematic.
So it's breaking free from repression.
Yeah, yeah. Repression, suppression, the things that says this is how you're supposed to be.
Yeah.
And you're, good boys and girls don't have those thoughts.
Breaking the taboo.
Breaking the taboo.
And
I
in doing so, then you are going with the flow
right,
and not freezing or holding back or damming, meaning creating a dam, a
right,
barrier, a boundary
right,
around this natural flow
right,
of what we all, regardless of whether it comes from yourself or an impulse or something you're picking up from the environment. So in an improv game where someone says, oh, hey, are you okay? And the other person's like, I'm fine, why? So then how do you respond to
well,
that
in an improv game,
disconnect?
yeah, when an improv game, yeah, that's a bad game. Because if somebody says, "Are you okay?" the last thing you want to say is, "I'm fine." The whole point of improv is to up the ante, so you want to get comfortable. So, are you okay? No, no. You've never believed what will happen to me, and then you go off and you
Okay.
know into but what people do, right, in life. Are you okay? Oh yeah, I'm fine.
Yeah,
So the improv would be the exact opposite. It would be to embrace the conflict.
got it.
And so, but in cultures like, typically in Western culture these days, women aren't supposed to be angry and men aren't supposed to be sad, right? That's sort of how it goes. Just a little stereotype, but it still holds, I think. And so if a woman gets angry, or it could be the other way around, she won't own that anger and use the power, the healthy power. And the man or whoever it is who doesn't can't be vulnerable, can't be sad, they won't let that flow, and then nothing changes.
Yeah, so
So
those are some
whatever,
old dynamics from another time and place that people have been raised with, depending upon culture and history and so on. But we're really talking about breaking those
right.
tendencies for a greater flow, for creativity, for healing traumatic wounds,
Mhm.
for being more open to what life has to offer. And the word that keeps running through my mind of what we've been talking about, where like, are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine, when you know they aren't, is gaslighting. And that kind of came out. I mean, it's an older term, but it
Yeah,
became popular more recently. And I have some conflict around it only because I think it's a phenomenon that does definitely happen, but I've seen people use the term gaslighting in a gaslighting way.
sure.
So it's like there's no objective space for saying this is truly the gaslighting. It's almost like mudslinging. You can go back and forth around it, but it gets to this notion of discernment. How do you know your truth? Whether
Mm,
your truth is, yes, I was abused, and people are saying, no, you weren't, or that was abuse, or it is abuse. No, it's not. Or something's wonky in this room. No, we're all fine. It's you. You
right.
must be off. Are you in a bad mood? And so, or the intuition of, I think this is going to happen, or I feel a certain way, and then contrary information. So, do you have a system or a sense of how you've navigated through your own personal discernment?
Yeah. So I remember years ago, I happened to be living in on a kibbutz in Israel, and it's a small town, so
Mhm.
so to speak. And so there was this rumor going around that um, this person was having an affair. Who's this person having an affair with? Frankly, I really wasn't that concerned. Anyway, so we were going on a trip with a bunch of people, and I saw an interaction between the person and another person. If it lasted a half a second, and I'm like, oh my God, that's the person. What was it? I don't know. It lasted too long, whatever it was. And I decided, okay, I was gonna check on it. And everybody said, nope, nope, not true. And and I'm like, damn, I could have sworn that was the right person. I really, really. And anyway, time goes by. There's that look again. Damn it. And so I check again. I got confirmation that it was it. And I'm like, son of a, you know,
Yeah.
uh, I was right.
Yep.
And so part of, and so that got me, I was like in my 20s, and that sort of got me on this thing about, you have to sort of do your best to make a prediction and see if it comes true and check it out, and be open to the data,
Hmm.
um, and calibrate your intuition, because sometimes you're wrong, and
Yeah.
if you can figure out the difference between when I'm wrong and when I'm right, how do you know? And it's a sense of, there are certain feelings you have, or you might um, you might hear it, or you might see it, or a sensation. And if you can begin to figure that out, or just be open to the idea that maybe, well, either you're right, like, especially if you always doubt yourself. So if a person's always doubting themselves, like, well, maybe, look for how you might be right, at least partially right, because
Hmm.
maybe it wasn't everything, but you got something.
Hmm.
Which, you said something just really, like, well, whether something was abuse. So abuse is is a story, because it's a word that says has a whole bunch of meaning, which is not the same as saying so and so touched somebody else in such a place. Those are facts. And so, you abused me. I don't know. You touched me in a certain place at a certain time. That's different. Or
Mhm.
you are emotionally abusive. Well, I don't know. We have to then agree on that story. So if you can sometimes get more to the specific things that are without the judgment behind it, that can be helpful. Yes, this person was yelling at me and their voice was really loud and their face was all scrunched up and I felt really like small.
Mhm.
Yeah, those things all happened.
Yeah.
What we call that is a whole, but I think that helps to um, for a person to get more feedback that what they're thinking and feeling about what's going on is right. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. I like also what you said. Thank you for that. To be more behaviorally descriptive rather than a summary statement. And it can still be denied even with
Oh,
behavioral descriptors. True. So this notion of discernment and being right, I learned later in life that I was right, but not with the timing. And sometimes I had to wait decades, which to see the accuracy of what I was receiving or getting, understanding. And so you tend to doubt yourself. And then later on, something comes out and you're like, I was right all along. Okay, interesting. I remember being in a training situation. So I was a student with other students, and we had a couple people who were training us. So positions of power who had always guided us correctly. And the group of us decided that some dynamic was happening in the room, and we each spoke to it in our own way and reinforced each other's belief structure. And both of our trainers disagreed with the group vehemently.
hmm
And we were confused and upset because we were being trained to trust our intuition and our judgment and our professional opinions, and being told you're farther along now in your program and you should really be acting with more personal authority. And here we went and did it, and we were cut down. And we all talked about it later, and each of us was like, not only do we think we're right, because there was some doubt maybe we were wrong, but I think that all of us hit a nerve that was too dangerous for the trainers to admit to. And they actually tried to convince us of the opposite. And it took a long time, years, but we finally realized we were given the confirmation that we were correct. And what it was is that one of the trainers was naive to the situation, and the other one was intimidated. And so the intimidated person distorted reality in order to save themselves, basically. And that was an important lesson. It was somewhat demoralizing, and it was a maturing lesson, a lesson in maturity.
Yeah.
And that stuck with me a long time.
Yeah, and I think, for the people that are therapists, you'll get that even sometimes clients will say something to you to you the me or you the therapist that
Yeah.
is, they pick up on something and it's like going gazoink, you know. And it's really important not to, I mean, to not respond to the shame that you feel or the embarrassment and say no, would be to sit there and go, well, tell me more about that. And maybe just, yeah, I was feeling something. You're right. It's good that you noticed that. I'm sorry. Or, cause that's like huge. I mean,
Yeah.
especially, for a client, for if that happens, or the other thing would be they tell you about somebody, something else, and to sit there and spend some time with them, and not to get right to you're right, they're wrong, they're wrong, you're right, but well, what's that like for you? What's going on? How do you know? Okay, well, let's suppose you're right, and you go with your feelings. What does that mean to you?
Yeah.
Okay, what if you're wrong? What would that mean to you? What
Yeah.
if you're right and they're and you deny yourself? You know, can you stay in the can you sort of trust that you're picking up on something, even if you're wrong in some aspect? Maybe you're right, and can you just hold that in this sort of unknown, not have it totally resolved, like you said, it took you years
Yeah.
for it to resolve.
Yeah, it
So
took a couple of years. The person who was embarrassed to admit the truth wound up leaving that organization.
mm,
And years later, somebody in our group had contact, and they said, "Remember that day?" And the person who left the organization said, "I know exactly what you're talking about, and you were right." But they admitted that they were in a very difficult situation. And so, yes, ideally, we would each own our own truth, even if it meant that we couldn't save face, we were humiliated, embarrassed. But the truth of the matter is that we're human, whether we're therapists or not, and there's a strong tendency to want to kind of protect ourselves.
right.
And so we do tend to distort information at times. So to give some grace for kind of all of it, but it was very gratifying and
Right.
confidence boosting to hear that we were right. So anyway,
Well, you're right. I mean, and at the same time, yes, and um, for those listening who, are this means something to them or might mean something to them, the idea of being in integrity means that you do the best you can. So, um, to the extent that here's an example. Uh, there's some middle ground. So if somebody like if my kid came up to me and said, "Dad, what's wrong?" I am fairly certain I would not say nothing.
hmm
I would say, if I didn't want him to know whatever it was, I would say, "Yeah, you're right. You're picking up on something, but I don't choose to share it with you right now."
uh-huh.
At least, I mean, you know, I'm not gaslighting him, saying he's missing, and I'm just saying I have a boundary. Say I'm choosing not to share.
Yeah.
I think you can say I choose not to share, or yes, you're right, but I don't want to go any further.
Yeah.
Um, or you could just say I'll tell you. Um, you have a lot of option, but in the well, essentially we got to hear the idea of saying, admitting something and saying I'm a big apologize guy. I like you can get, and I think you've known. I mean, people have come to me and said things, and I will say you're right. I screwed up.
hmm
Um, I like it's really important to me to say if I make a mistake, I own it, and or some people just won't do that,
hmm
and that becomes there's no room for growth, there's no room for change if you can't own that you've made a mistake.
Yes. Yep.
And,
Yeah.
so to the extent that
Good.
one can, that makes it, I think that's a way to be in the world that you make a difference, right? You are the difference. So when we lie and say, oh, no, I didn't do that, or I don't want to deal with that, or no, that didn't happen, or I didn't make a mistake, it doesn't really help the world generally.
No, nor to gloat when you're right. Yeah. You're like, woohoo, I was right. Yeah. So let's see. So let's put this into a bigger context. So we all have situations where we miss the mark, which
Yes,
is
we sin
exactly, we miss
because
the mark.
that's what sin means, to miss.
Exactly. That's why I chose that phrase.
Yes, I figured as much.
Yeah. So we miss the mark. But then there is, as you said, time opportunity usually to rectify,
Mhm.
to course correct, to learn, to grow. So even if you said no, but you can still say yes and.
Yeah, later. Hmm.
Hmm. And so that's where possibility opens up again. And so I'm wondering if you have any stories or thoughts about times with either discernment or with accepting things as they are rather than you want them to be, that have shown you a yes and when you thought it was a no but.
Well, that's an interesting question, and um, uh, um, hmm.
You don't have to answer it. I know I'm throwing it out.
I know there have been. I'm just trying. It's a. Um, I can certainly. I don't know if I can come up with an exact example at the moment. Well, okay. Here's an example. Um, when we many years ago we redid our kitchen, and we have a wood floor in the new kitchen, and it takes a long time to do. It was totally gutted anyway. So this refrigerator was not pushed into the place it needed to go, and I just lost my patience and I tried to push it in. Well, you know, I scratched the floor. And you'd think, I mean, I, my reaction to this was, my wife is going to kill me. I'm going to get divorced. I mean, you would have thought that, I mean, really, I was like in a panic.
Okay.
I mean, I'm talking full blown, like, I thought it was over. Like,
Wow.
it was crazy. I to this day don't quite know, other than I knew that I was really upset with myself because I just couldn't wait. I just couldn't wait for the guy to put it in.
Yeah.
And I was upset with myself. And so, I finally said something to my wife, and I was like, "You're gonna kill me! Don't really, please don't divorce me." And, I mean, eh, she didn't divorce me, but I have to say, what 2 doors down from me, uh, or my neighbors, one of their children accidentally, well, was in a made a mistake and killed somebody in a car, and it was really her fault. I mean, badly, and she ended up going to jail. And I remember thinking, oh my God, if I feel this over a stupid refrigerator, how horrible must it be for somebody? I mean, who did it? I mean,
Yeah.
she caused that. I mean, through her negligence, caused somebody to die and somebody else to be paralyzed. Um, and so, which gets us into self-forgiveness, right? Like when you make a mistake, a really bad one, how do you come back from that?
Yeah.
Be really, really challenging. And there could be anything in between because we make mistakes in our lives. We bring things upon ourselves, or we bring things upon others,
Yes.
and it can be really painful.
What a devastating moment.
Yeah, can you imagine? I mean, it just had to be 100 times worse than whatever I was going through. And
Right.
what I was going through felt pretty awful.
And then how do we turn that into a yes and, or is there even a way?
Well, I'll tell you, here's one of the things I would, one of the things you can't do or don't do with therapists is tell people it's not your fault.
Hmm.
Worst thing on the planet. I've worked with a lot of trauma survivors, and um, sometimes they get in part of what happens and how they carry on life afterwards is they do things, they act out in ways that causes even more trauma. And they know that at some level. And if you tell them, oh, it's not your fault, they know you're full of crap.
Hmm.
So to be able to sit with someone and say, wow, it looks like, maybe you were acting out based on this and that caused, you brought this upon yourself, can actually be a kind of relief to someone who can't ever say it.
Hmm.
Because everybody's so busy saying, oh, it's not your fault, they're there. And the person just knows for an absolute fact that you don't get it,
So
right?
naming the reality of the ugly truths.
It's hard, but sometimes you have to say the ugly, you have to have the courage to say the ugly truth because behind that, you have to believe that something will come of it.
Yeah.
Uh, and only then can somebody do some self-forgiveness or say, oh, you know what? No wonder I did this because I, was acting, I was, acting something out from some traumatic memory, and that makes sense to me, and I can be kind to myself because now I understand why I did what I did.
So to clarify, you're not saying that the original abuse, let's say,
No, not
was
no.
that you're saying, yes, you're right. This was your fault. You created this harm to yourself. You're talking about the after effects.
That in the particular case I'm thinking about, yes, a woman was abused a lot, and then later on she would act out sexually and cause all kinds of trouble for herself.
Right.
No.
Yeah. And so where these seeds are planted and who's responsible, because it gives you if you say nothing is my fault, then you have no control over changing anything. Yeah. It, I'm reminded, we're coming to the end here, but I'm reminded of another very dramatic story, which was part of our ACEP conference a couple of years ago, about the young man who was killed and the act of forgiveness that his father,
Oh,
yes,
I know you're talking about now.
Nassim
Yeah.
Khamisa, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And how do you come to forgive the murderer of your child? How do you come to forgive yourself for being the person who created the harm? So these are the most compelling moments of life. There
Hmm.
are few things that are more treacherous or um, gut-wrenching that bring us to our knees more,
Right.
especially the death of a child.
Right.
And it's very easy to understand shutting down.
Totally. I mean, if
And
I don't know that I could do what Azim did. I mean, I figure I'd just fail at that completely.
but people do. They create a yes and out of it. And on some level, it makes a lot of sense because to continue with the no is a choice, an understandable one, but it actually adds to the misery that's already been created.
So I can tell you two stories.
Okay.
They both have to do with 9/11.
All right.
I was in a group running. I was invited to be a guest at a support group, and I was working with this group, and there was this one guy who was, saying, "Oh, was a pretty angry guy," and was talking about, how bad they were and how much he was suffering and whatever. And I gave him what I call the matrix intervention, and I say to him, "Okay, so if I've got this pill in my hand, and it will take away all your anger, all your pain, you will be at peace, no side effects, no nothing. Do you want the pill?" And he went, oh, I see. I guess I'm not ready.
Mhm.
To his credit.
Yeah.
So that's one story. Another story similar to that. Actually, from that group, a woman came to see me whose son had died in 9/11, and she just could not get over it. She just could not get over it. And she was focused on how wrong it was, and his 2022, and his life, and nothing I did really was very helpful to her. until one day where I sort of got this thing sort of showed up in my mind because she was talking about, basically everything that she'd lost. I said to her, I think I had her close her eyes and just relax a little bit. I said, I want you to imagine something. Imagine it's 23 years ago, and an angel comes to you and says, um, we've got this great soul who wants to come into life and has chosen you to be their mother. And this person's amazing. However, in 20 odd years, he's going to be needed elsewhere in the universe, and he's
Yeah.
going to have your choice. Do you want, I mean, you have the choice to have him come or not. And you could just see her whole body kind of.
Yeah.
She said, no, I would choose him. And from that moment on, she was like, supremely better.
Yeah.
She focused on what she did, because she was dealing with this assumption that he should be there forever. And once it was like, well, maybe he's only supposed to be there for 20 years.
Right.
It's changed everything. And she was thankful for that.
Beautiful. Wow.
But you don't get those moments too. I mean, that was just, I mean, I don't know where that came from, but from me, it was just like, here. So for all I know, the angel came and said it to me. Maybe it was true. Who knows?
Well, those are beautiful stories. Thank you for rising to the occasion. I knew I threw a curveball question at you, but I knew that you would find some real gems, and you have. And thank you for what you've created in those moments of saying yes and when it looked like it was no but.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
those are very, very poignant stories, from the refrigerator to 9/11 and car, accidents, whatever it was. So thank you for sharing that. And I think that this is going to be inspirational for people. We often think about what should be, not what is.
Right.
And when we focus on what is and the choices that we make for what is, it can be very empowering. It can be devastating, but it can also be very empowering. So,
One of one of the things, for people that are therapists, one of the things I've noticed in training folks is they get into, am I doing it right?
mhm,
Something like EFT or, what should I say? And the thing I try to convey in part is that, first of all, we're not trying to fix the problem. You're trying to meet the person and, shift things. And if you can just accept whatever shows up, trust the process, whatever, even if, you're tapping on it, doesn't go the way you think it ought, just whatever there, it comes in there. This is, Milton Erickson's utilization approach. You just accept. You yes and it,
yeah,
which is exactly utilization. Um, you'll get there.
yeah,
You always get to where you need to get. And to the extent that you can just embrace that in working with clients, and especially when things aren't going the way, you would hope, it always goes better. I mean, there are days that I, fail at my own advice and it never goes well. But if I take my own advice, it usually goes pretty good.
thank you for that. Words of wisdom from Dr. Bob.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here today and
Pleasure. It was fun.
sharing. Yeah, good conversation as usual.
Yep.
Is there anything else you'd like to say before we say goodbye for today?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Well, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for today's podcast. If you want to learn more, you can visit my website for podcast and resources at hopshealingtips.com. You can also like, share, and subscribe to this channel. This podcast is for information and entertainment purposes only and is not providing healthcare advice. Please seek guidance from your professional healthcare team should you need assistance.